Okay. Hello, everyone. I am here today with Christie Lee of Nourishing Food Marketing, and I'm super excited to have her here. Christie, hello.
Hello, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Maya.
I'm excited to have you. This is a topic that I'm really excited to talk about. We're talking about staying relevant with millennials and building a climate-friendly and anti-racist brand. So, Christie, do you want to get started and just give us a little bit of information on your background and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So today, as Maya mentioned, we're going to be talking about staying relevant with millennials, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means and why, and how to build a climate-friendly and anti-racist brands. And so I'll actually, the next slide, I'm the founder of Nourishing Food Marketing. We help brands take flight and scale. What this means is that we take brands from zero, like they're just an idea in a founder's mind, into something that is living and breathing and consumers can love and purchase on shelf. And so I have a background in big food at Clorox with Americana brands like Hidden Valley Ranch and Kingsford Turkle. I've also spent the last decade plus working on CPG startups, including a couple of years of starting my own brand, Tiny Hero. And the last couple of years, it's been a really big transition for brands as they start to come into the world. I've worked with Moonshot and Connect over the last couple of years to start the brands from scratch. And the way that they approach how they come into the world is quite different. It's very interesting to see that shift in culture and in requirements for what millennials or consumers are requiring of companies. So these brands are expecting to be more climate friendly, more anti-racist, in order to fit with our own values, our consumer values that have been changing.
Right.
So I'll talk a little bit.
Go ahead.
I'll talk a little bit about why this matters. And if you're here, you probably already think this matters. So I'll just give you a couple of facts to convince those around you. But these values are going to impact your business. Millennials care. 73% of them say they'd spend more for sustainable products. And 83% of them want companies to align with their values. So it's really important to them what they're buying, how they're spending the money. And millennials are starting to have more and more money. We've heard about the geriatric millennials, and they are having a ton of spending power. And so as you think about your brand, we'll talk today about how you can actually meet these requirements that they're requiring. And so this is from Nielsen, this information in 2015. And then the second fact, which is just crazy, is 55% of dollar market growth in food and beverage from 2015 to 2020 is from sustainably marketed products. And so if you think about typical big CPG growing 2 to 3% a year, challenger brands are growing like crazy. We're still working on getting that overall dollar market share to be a big number for small brands, but the growth, we're responsible for most of the growth in the industry. And so as you think about building new brands, building your own brand and evolving it, as you think about launching new products, these values will impact how well we do.
And Christie, just for anyone who might not know, could you explain what challenger brands are?
Yeah, so challenger brands are new brands. They're the Oatleys of the world that come into the market and say, hey, actually, this isn't a cow. This isn't cow-based milk. This is plant-based milk. They're the Impossible Foods of the world who come in and launch a product that are totally plant-based meats that kind of look and feel like plant-based meats. But they also could be just the brands that came out with the new variety of quinoa or the new variety of popcorn that is just a little bit better than what the market leader is out there with.
Great. Thank you.
So they're typically the ones that you see in, the Whole Foods and Sprouts of the world, where, you look at their packaging and you're like, wow, someone probably handmade this. So before we go on, I want to define these terms, because I think, first of all, words are very important. We'll talk more about that later. But also the definitions of these terms and truly understanding them are important. So what does climate friendly mean? It means that it's good for the planet. Like, how many times have you seen something that's labeled as sustainable, like a water bottle, a sustainable water bottle, because it has 20% less plastic, and you're like, that's greenwashing. I don't believe that. It's maybe better for the planet than the alternative, but it's not actually good for the planet. And so what I've been hearing a lot from brands recently is sustainable is a co-opted term. It doesn't really mean that much anymore. It's the most common term that consumers know, but it doesn't actually have deep meaning. It doesn't mean something like organic or non-GMO, because there aren't any requirements to use the word sustainable. The FTC has the green guides that guides what you can say about sustainable, but they haven't updated this in a decade. So, it doesn't really do a great job of protecting consumers from that. So climate friendly means good for the planet, not better for the planet, like definitively actually good for the planet. Okay, anti-racist, what does that mean? So this is a definition that came straight from, I think, the canonical book on anti-racism by Ibram Kendi. I highly recommend you read it if you haven't done so. It was world-changing for me. But he says to be anti-racist is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups. And to me, what this means is it doesn't matter if you think of something as a good thing. Like, I think a common misconception out there is like, all Asians are good at math. And it's like, well, some Asians are good at math, but some Asians are terrible at math, right? Just like anything else. And you might say things that are truly, truly like hurtful for some people. Like, you could say, oh, okay, like Black people are poorer. That's also anti-racist. Even if the some Black people are poor, that doesn't mean that all Black people are. I know plenty of rich Black people, right? So the fact that we say things in generalizations is racist. If we want to live anti-racist lives, then we should look at humans and individuals and look at what they do behaviorally on an individualistic basis. And that's the best way to sort of live your life and feel good about the sort of decisions that you're making. The other thing that I want to put out there is that the reason why we're talking about these super two complicated topics together is because they're intersectional, they're interrelated, they depend on each other. We need to solve one in order to solve the other. And I'll say this because climate change is a social justice issue. Low income neighborhoods have half as many trees and can experience temperature differences up to 20 degrees higher than other neighborhoods. So with climate change happening, low income neighborhoods which are typically people of color, are impacted more. So, people of color are disproportionately experiencing the impacts of climate change because they have been in areas that think about New Orleans, are low lying and are in danger of flooding. They're in areas that are closer to factories and have more pollution. So these two issues are so interconnected that they're not in a silo that you can solve on your own. You can't say, actually, I care about the world, the planet more than anything else. I want to solve that issue. If you solve that issue, you also have to think about people of color and how they can be part of your solution and how they can help you get there. Same if you said, I actually care about social justice the most. You can't just solve that issue, because if you don't help solve climate change, it doesn't matter. Then there's so much in the lives of people of color that are impacted that inferiorly that we'll need to solve. So these are very intersectional. You might hear that term a lot, terms and topics, because they're not single silo issues. We have to solve them together. Okay, so now we'll get to the actual interesting stuff. I just wanted to set the stage of like who we are, who I am, what we're talking about, why it matters, and like do some definitions. Okay, so here's tip number one. This should be no surprise to you. We are consumer packaged goods companies. We should put the consumer first. And that is true even in these situations. So for example, when you're designing a product in marketing, you say, okay, what's the consumer pain point? What do they need to be solved more than anything? And here, with sustainability claims or climate friendly claims, you also have to put that lens on. Like, why should they be interested in what I'm saying? So consumers are actually interested in specific claims that are related to them. So the word sustainable I mentioned before is not as meaningful as contributes to cleaner air and water. And so this is actually backed up with custom research talking to 3,000 consumers that I did over this last year with Connect. They have a wonderful product that is sustainably grown with no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and it contributes to cleaner air and water. We tested a lot of different terms with consumers to see what they would find most interesting that would help them drive their purchasing decision. And terms like contributes to cleaner air and water, which are A, very specific, they understand what that means, and B, relevant to them. I breathe air, like my family is going into the water. That's something that's important to me, is much more meaningful. Here's another example. Ingredients grown with regenerative agricultural practices. What does that mean? If you're in the industry, maybe you know what that means, but the average consumer doesn't. So that's not as meaningful as builds healthy soil or captures carbon in the soil. So being more specific is better than being broader, but also making sure that these claims that you're talking about are relevant to consumers and that they care about them. They're not just something that you care about is important. The last thing that I'll say here is that consumers really care about who grows their food and where it comes from. And that's especially true over the last 2 years. We saw and were worried about where our food was coming from. We saw and were worried about the global supply chain and how we were going to get ingredients. We've seen how that's impacted both pricing and supply in the grocery stores. And so consumers are really starting to pay attention to who grows their food, who's the farmer, what's his or her name, where do they live, what kind of farming practices are they using, and if it's something that they agree with. And so all these things are ways that when we think about building climate friendly products are probably things that we're thinking about, and some of the claims that we can make are more relevant than others. The other thing that I'll say here is that when you're going to market and you have a new product, maybe you have a new brand, maybe you just have a new product flavor for an existing product that you have out there, it's expensive to have a consumer try your product. It's expensive to have them pick up your product. You might be couponing them. You might be doing digital marketing in order to get them to know who you are and drive awareness and trial. You may be doing a promotion with the retailer itself. All those things cost money, time, and effort. And so you want to turn every person who tries your product into a consumer advocate. You want them to purchase your product again and again. You want them to tell all their friends, and you want them to become a repeat customer of yours. So climate friendly and anti-racist values and claims are typically not primary purchasing criteria. If your product isn't food, your primary purchasing criteria is probably flavor, taste, or texture. That's what consumers care about. But these values are secondary purchasing criteria. They're a reason why consumers come back to buy you again and again. They take the product home, they find out more, they actually read the back of the package, they learn more about your story, and they can actually come back and purchase you again because they like what you're doing. So share your story and journey on the back of your packaging and on your website, your email, and your social media. This way, you can tell the story of all the great work that you're doing, even though on your packaging on the front, it's really hard to tell that story. But that's okay, because when they're originally purchasing their product, they don't really care. The same goes true for e-commerce. When you're looking at that first image that's after your product image, talk about the things that consumers care most about when they're purchasing. But don't forget to put in your A+ content the story of your product as well, because the people who scroll really care. Not everyone scrolls, but the people who scroll really care. Tip number 2, be inclusive of all consumers. Again, we're a consumer packaged goods company. Let's act like it. Let's go out there and represent the consumers that we have. So one thing that I've been working a lot on is trying to use gender neutral language where possible. For example, I used to say, hi guys a lot. It's a common term, but it's not inclusive. I'm actually not a guy, I'm a gal. So can you say hi y'all, hi friends, like hi everyone, hi team. There's a lot of ways that we can say this. And it's not so much for some people, the word really matters, and words do really matter. But for others, it's actually the thinking of and the changing of our brains that can help us, make more impactful changes in the way that we live and see the world and act within. The second way that you can be inclusive of consumers is to hire models, use stock photography that are representative of all your consumers. When you're doing a photo shoot, don't just go for your best friend. Look for models across the range of people of color, and that typically means more melanin. It's really sad when you see a brand that you love and you go to their website, you're like, that person looks not like me, that person looks not like me, all these people are not me, right? So how can you help represent all of your consumers? The second is hire BIPOC people. This should be a no-brainer, but it's hard right now. Not everyone is doing it. And so when you're recruiting, cast a really wide net. Try to get the word out there about your job roles for full-time employees. When you're looking at even contractors or influencers that you're hiring, hire people of color. The other thing that I'll say here is that it's not enough to be equal in today's world, because being equal assumes that we all started from the same place. And it is definitively true that because of our skin color, we all don't start in the same place. And so how can we expect to make decisions with equality in mind? What we want to do is we want to bring equality in how we assess, does this person have the skills? They may not have had the opportunity to do the job before because of their skin color, but do they have the skills and the aptitude in order to do that? So just something to think about when you're hiring. Okay, my third tip is all about how to think about becoming climate friendly. So for CPG companies, you most typically focus on, and so this is, to do this right, you should do carbon accounting. That is when you do a whole life cycle assessment on your particular product, how you are making it, how you are getting it to your customers, and then to your consumers. In order to do this, you can check out Planet Forward. They're a company that I advise that does a fantastic job doing carbon assessments simply, quickly, and affordably. And when you do this type of carbon assessment, it will tell you which areas to focus on. They'll look at transportation, they'll look at ingredients, they'll look at your packaging, they'll look at everything from your life cycle in order to tell you, okay, here's what you should really focus on. After looking at many brands, here's a really general guide on what you should focus on. For CPG products, the most carbon impact is probably your ingredients. Who are you sourcing from? How are they growing that ingredient? How is it getting to you? How is your co-packer or your manufacturer using those ingredients? Are they running on renewable energy or not? How you actually make your product is the most typically impactful way that you can make a change to your carbon footprint. But for consumers, they actually care more about packaging because it's in their face. It's something that they take home. It's something that they have to throw out or they have to recycle. And so if you don't give them a good option for their end of life packaging, then that's that they personally feel that. They personally have to take on that guilt. Versus when you're making the product and making choices, they don't see that. And so I think that both of these two areas are things to focus on and think about, because one is best for the planet, it can solve for your carbon impact. And the second, because it's most consumer relevant, it can help you develop that climate friendly brand with consumers. My last tip is aim for progress, not perfection. That's me at the beginning of like an 8-mile hike in Yosemite, and I just needed to get to the end. It didn't have to be pretty. And this is my point. I These are really tough topics. I make mistakes all the time. No one is an expert because the world is changing, and we as human beings live in this society that has been made a certain way. So we don't always think of doing the right thing for the planet or the right thing for people. And so when we think about that, give yourself grace and know it's about the journey. Know that it's about making that progress. It's not about being 100% perfect, because if we aim for perfection, uh, and we may not feel like we can get there, and we may not make that progress. So making those trade-offs, particularly in the low margin CPG industry, I understand. I'm gonna let me forgive you now. And you do the hard work, but let me forgive you now for all the mistakes you'll make along the way, because that's a part of human nature. And so you yourself, as you go through all this, what you have to do is when a mistake happens from you or your team, you're like, gosh, we got to do better. Then the question you ask yourself is, what are the systems that I can put in place? How can I build processes? How can I build culture? How can I create onboarding processes so that this doesn't happen again? It's not to beat yourself up over the things that happen because we're human. It's to figure out, okay, identify the problem, like name it, and then solve it for next time. That's what we can do as people. So that's all I had. I would love to take any questions, and then I'll leave this slide up, which is if you want more tips on how to grow your brand, here are some other ways you can keep in touch with me. You can go to my newsletter, my free biweekly newsletter, and sign up with lots of free tips coming out on that. You can check out my blog and all the things about how to build brands. You can read my definitive guide to creating a marketing strategy. And particularly more on this topic, I wrote a anti-racist CPG series with BLAB, talking about how you can be anti-racist both individually, organizationally, and by using your brand platform on Medium. So check that out if you're interested in learning more.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christy. That was super, super interesting to hear, and I learned a lot, actually.
Amazing.
I had a question. So I know you mentioned Planet Forward as like carbon footprint analysis. Do you have any resources for people who are looking to diversify their models or their influencers that they're using? I have a feeling some people might just like not know where to go for that.
I think influencer research, the way that it is today, it isn't very systematized. It's very much on an individual basis, like research of like who fits with your product, who will do a good job, whose community will be interested in your product. And so just looking at profile pics is a big way that I do it. If you're working with an agency, an influencer agency, or a platform in order to do that, most of them at this point in time have a way to say, actually, I want to prioritize recruiting and working with influencers that are people of color. So the more that we as an industry tell agencies what we're looking for, the better. That means that they'll be thinking, oh, this is important to my clients. I'm going to actually do this. So the other thing that I do is I work with a lot of agencies, consultants, freelancers, because the CPG industry is tough and you don't always have the budget to hire someone full time. So when you do that, ask these people, what are their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies? What are they doing to recruit people of color? Do they have people of color on their teams? How we actually choose our partners is just as important as how we run our own business.
Right, that's a really good point. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, we will conclude the webinar here. I'll post all of these links onto SellerRocket's social media. So if you're interested in any of these resources, they will be there later today. Christy, do you have any last thoughts?
No, thank you all for joining, and thank you, Maya, for having me. I appreciate you.
Of course, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you for speaking with us. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and thank you for attending.